I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. Welcome to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. I'm registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and I'm your host. Today's podcast is for all of our listeners who love dining out, love trying the new dishes, exploring new chefs, and seeing what's out there in the culinary world. And as a registered dietitian, of course, so much of what I do in my daily life, my career, this podcast is all about nutrition and wellness and how to maximize our health. But I love dining out. I love going to restaurants, and I actually created our Eat Fit nonprofit restaurant initiative for that reason, so that I can dine out, and all of us who are looking for nutritious options, we can dine out, especially here in New Orleans and now around the state of Louisiana, and find healthy options on menus. So it's part of our nonprofit initiative through Ochsner Health System. So that's my full-time job. The podcast is a side fun job. But Eat Fit is a blast also. So what's been really cool is we've worked with restaurants. We add nutritious options to the menu. These are things that fit our nutritional criteria. So no white carbs, lower sugar, lower sodium, lower animal fats. And they put the Eat Fit seal on the menu. And we have Eat Fit NOLA here in New Orleans, but we've expanded through where Ochsner has a footprint. So we have Eat Fit BR, Eat Fit Acadiana, Eat Fit Shreveport, and we're expanding to Eat Fit Monroe. So it's a really cool thing. And over the years of working with Eat Fit, I've been lucky to develop close relationships with many of our restaurants, our local chefs, and really kind of just understand what's important to them and how we can incorporate Eat Fit in a way that fits with what they want to see on the menu, what the integrity and the fabric is of their restaurants, but also still what works nutritionally. But health aside, nutrition aside, dining out's just fun. We love going out to restaurants. We love the creativity, the innovation, and we love talking about it. We love reading about it. So today, this is just a really cool thing. I'm excited. Our guest is a correspondent he's the food correspondent for the New York Times. He's a friend of mine. His name is Brett Anderson. I love his writing style. I love talking with him. He makes me laugh pretty much. I feel like everything he says, even when he's not trying to be funny, often comes out a little bit humorous. His stories, his words that he uses are very colorful when he's talking, and especially when he's writing his stories. So I love hearing his stories. I love reading his stories. And today's podcast is all about merging the restaurant world with the nutrition world. And he's now food correspondent for the New York Times, but formerly he was a food restaurant critic for largely the Times-Picayune for about a large part of the past 20 years. And as a restaurant critic for 2 decades, he and I will talk about how did he merge that job with any semblance of wellness. So welcome, Brett. I am so happy to have you here with us today.
I'm happy to be here.
So you currently now, your role is with the New York Times as a food correspondent, which we'll be talking about more, diving into that, but writing about restaurants, food across the country, profiles, trend stories, investigative reporting about the industry. But before that, you were a restaurant critic for 20 years more.
I was at the Times-Picayune for 18 years, depending on how you do the math. I moved here to take the job in 2000. I took 1 year off to do a fellowship, an academic fellowship, where I was gone for a year. But, otherwise for, 2 decades almost, I wrote about restaurants for the Picayune, and had, that job was a restaurant critic job, but it is, at least the way it happened in the years I was at the Picayune, it wasn't strictly restaurant criticism in the way that the New York Times restaurant critic job is. There's always reporting duties, there is always profile writing duties, and there is, the unexpected things like Hurricane Katrina. I stopped writing restaurant reviews for 3 years, and the BP oil spill sort of put a hold in that kind of thing. And then towards the end of my tenure, I did less criticism than I had at the beginning. but that's what I did. I did not, to the topic at hand, like because of that work, and I'd been a restaurant critic for 5 years also before moving here in Washington, D.C., and which basically is my entire adult life. And so
you said you've been a restaurant critic since you're 25 years old. You're 49 now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when I was 25, my first job was as a music writer, a pop music critic. And then I kind of transitioned into this food columnist job at a newspaper in Washington, D.C. And starting then, I was eating out. That job, I probably ate out 6-7 times a week, meals a week. And then at the Picayune job, for most of the time I was there, I was eating out 8 to 10 times a week. That ticked down a little bit when I became a dad. Became kind of a late dad 5 years ago. But that's, my relationship with food and with eating adventurously, really began after I got out of college, for the most part. So,
and you don't portray yourself at all like, I try to do the right thing. I try to be healthy. You fully confess this for the large part of your life. Nutrition wasn't kind of in the forefront of your mind. But as you mentioned, after you had after you became a dad, you became more aware and wanted to be fully there, feel good, be energetic and stuff. So you did kind of start shifting a bit.
Yeah. I mean, that transition to, to parenting, it occasioned more eating at home. And I had always, in the years that I wrote criticism and ate out a lot because of it, when I did eat at home, it would tend to be healthier stuff, and it would tend to be not meat, just because that's kind of what my palate wanted.
But you're like listening to your body. Like,
yeah,
there's
I was
only
listening
so
to my
much
body a little bit.
rich that you were going to have.
You want a break, I like, and as I got older, the sort of listening to your body thing became more of something I couldn't ignore.
Right.
When I was younger, I didn't. And so, so that transition has been partly health consciousness, but also just partly, aging. And, all that being said, there's a lot of, I love vegetables. Like, there's healthy things I love. I love grains. I love things that are healthy, because I think they taste great. And I think I do sort of instinctually like the way that they make me feel.
I think that a lot of people would look at a job like yours back in the day that you were a restaurant critic and think, and also a lot of people didn't know what you looked like at that time too. They had no idea like what Brett Anderson looked like. And so, I think that could be a real problem for a lot of people if that's their job, but you've always kind of maintained a decent, like
I'm not obese. Right. Is that what you're trying to say? I do have a dad bod,
I'm like, how do I say it? You're in quite fine shape.
People do. I mean, I'm not like, I would not say I'm in super great shape. I mean, I go to the gym, but
a dad bod is a good way to say it.
I have a dad bod. But people often, I think they will they stumble over that same thing you just stumbled over. It's like, aren't you supposed to be
exactly
fatter than you are?
That's what I'm trying to say.
I think I'm lucky. I'm sort of naturally big. I'm tall, and so there's a lot more place to stuff calories. And no one in my family is obese. I think I probably have pretty decent genes in that regard. But I haven't, most of my life, I have not turned food away because I think it's going to be unhealthy.
Right.
Like that just hasn't been part of my wiring.
And you and I touched base on it before this. And we said, okay, what are we going to talk about with the podcast? And the idea of this is not how does a food critic, a restaurant critic, really, how much does he care about nutrition? That's not as much what this is about. What I also think is just fascinating is, as we'll talk about coming up, some of the investigative side of what you do. But I also think the world of a restaurant critic is fascinating. And I think most of us have no idea really kind of what's behind it. So even though I know that you've moved into another role, if we're taking a step back and looking at it, walk us through, what does that look like as a restaurant critic? Because, okay, so here in New Orleans, how many restaurants do we have now?
Oh God, I don't
I mean,
know.
it's like, is it like
I don't.
1,500?
That seems about right.
Ish.
Yeah, but I don't know off the
So
top of my
then
head anymore.
how do you decide which restaurants you're going to go to? And kind of what does that look like, just even on that first step?
Well, when I was writing regular, single restaurant reviews weekly, which I did for many years, I was always the choices I made for dining out is I wanted there to be a mix of, well, priority on new restaurants, right? But then also, I wanted a diversity of styles of food, So like if I had just reviewed an Italian place, I would not be, I'd be looking to take a break on Italian for a while and would want to switch to a different style. And I also wanted geographic diversity, the Picayune when it was around and it was a big, good business. We had readers in the North Shore, and we had readers on the West Bank, and we had readers in all these different parishes, and that's an area that
they want to be represented.
They want to be represented. And I wanted to find out what is happening in the New Orleans area. I mean, you often will get people get weird about if you write about a Metairie restaurant. It's like, well, that's not a New Orleans restaurant. It's like, come on, this is the metro area. This is a community. And so it's like diversity of style, diversity of price, and diversity of geography. And then also, the Picayune stopped doing restaurant ratings. We had a 5-scale system, and they were beans instead of stars, red beans. You'd want a diversity of that too. You always kind of want to be on the lookout for places that you just flat out love and want to rave about and give a really high rating to. And you particularly I would particularly be interested in that when it had been a while, that kind of thing. And
why did they do away with the rating?
It was, like the business changed, and the amount of time that I devoted and resources I devoted to writing a single review and the amount of traffic that it generated was kind of at odds with the way that the business model at the time was going.
Yeah.
Put it that way. But we still wanted to provide, critical dining advice that a lot of people would read. And I kind of shifted to writing things more like guides, telling people where to go. And for starting in 2003, we also did twice a year, we would publish these dining guides that, where I would in some years write about 100 different restaurants.
It was a beast of a project twice a year for you.
And so I was, when I was dining out, for those years, I was always mixing in older places to revisit, because I always thought it was really important to kind of check back in on restaurants to see how they were performing, right?
Like our old standbys, when the hot ones come in, the new ones come in.
Yeah,
right?
And restaurants go up and down, and they're living, breathing things that change over time, even if the personnel doesn't change. And I always liked tracking that. That was one of the great pleasures, I think, of writing for the local newspaper in New Orleans. It's that you don't get, I feel like, in some of the other markets where I see people writing restaurant criticism, where it wasn't.
They're not family owned. They're not so.
Well, no, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I had this reason to return to old places a lot. And that incentive isn't built into the way a lot of other people do the jobs. And I liked that. And it made me feel like I had a deeper understanding of how people ate here in New Orleans and how people continue to eat here, as opposed to just what new food they were, what the new places were like, right? Even though that was important. So
when it was during the time that you were actually doing the critic part of it, and so you would establish, okay, this is the restaurant I'm going to go to. How many times would you go to a restaurant? And how did you, if it was a place that takes reservations, how did that work? Did they know your face? Did they know who you were?
Well, I would always go to restaurants if I was reviewing them at a minimum 3 different times. And they would be, ideally spread out over at least 3 weeks to a month.
Different times a day or different days of the week? Or
I tended to, to favor dinners because, in many of the restaurants that I reviewed, that was kind of where they were really showcasing the what they were trying to do. But lunches were fair game. But mainly it would be dinners, and I would go with, one or two or three other people, and with the ambition to try most of the menu. So like if you and I went to a restaurant and it was my second visit of a review, we'd get the menu and I'd be like, look, I've already had this item and this item and this item and this item, so they're off. We can't get those because I'm trying to, maximize that. And I would get reservations in different names, fake names, or in my friends' names. In the early days, I had a fake names on my credit card so that people wouldn't, figure it out that way. Over time, particularly after Katrina, so, Katrina happened in 2005. I got here in 2000. That changed. It became clear to me as I sort of switched to my reporting role that like people who made it their business to know what I looked like knew what I looked like. Right. And while I continued up until May, in the shit.
It's okay.
July, when that job ended, I continued to get reservations under different people's names, even when I knew full well when I showed up that they would know who I was, because the reason for that is I didn't want to give restaurants that knew who I was a heads up that I was coming, so that they can kind of prepare different things, just to be sort of fair across the board. That I didn't, that was one way I could sort of regulate not rewarding people who knew what I was, to be able to kind of game the system a little bit. But there's no denying that I got better. I tended to get pretty good service. When I went to restaurants at the last, many years, I did struggle to write about service because in any kind of substantive way, because it was just kind of so clear.
You were getting,
I was just getting really fawning service. I never got, crappy service. When I was young and I wrote for this weekly newspaper in Washington, D.C., I was kind of a young, I've never been a very fancy dresser or whatever. I would get treated crappily all the time,
That puts it mildly. I've never been a fancy dresser. I don't think I've ever seen you outside of a baseball cap, t-shirt, and shorts.
I mean, when I go to restaurants, I dress up at night. But, that was a lot more grist for the columns is, and in DC is a real power centric town, and no one had me marked as someone who was powerful. And so that, in that changed. It
gave a true objective picture.
Yeah, about what it's like to be, treated like a nobody. It didn't take long for me being in New Orleans to there wasn't that many experiences where I was treated like a nobody.
And I think here people tend to be gracious anyway. They tend to at least be polite. But if you walk in, they may not know that you were coming. But then if the chef, the owner, what manager knows you, immediately the restaurant's going to up their game.
Service is the one thing you can kind of snap to attention, right? I mean, exactly. So that's how I did it. And when caller ID came in like that, that didn't exist when I first started. Right? I got kind of...
It'd be a lot harder these days, too, to have a different name on your credit card. Like there would just be all these other things.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you'd be surprised. I haven't tried it for a while. I stopped using the fake names, but on the cards. But in the old days, it couldn't have been easier to do.
So what about when back in the time that you were rating them? Mm-hmm. And how would it be? Was it hard to give a restaurant a poor rating, or was it sometimes not hard at all because it was just so bad? You felt really passionately about it. Did you feel bad about it?
I don't know if I could put it so much in those terms. I definitely felt something about it. But let me put it this way. I always thought I care about fairness. I care about being able to defend my work, both to the subjects and to the readers, right? Like a conversation I would have a lot with restaurateurs who were upset with something I wrote, and often it would be like, I don't feel like I didn't do a lot of 1B bean ratings. As far as I'm concerned, I was not overly harsh, but I also I only gave 3 5-star reviews in all those years. So I was kind of stingy in that way. I always kind of felt that if you go to a restaurant 3 times, 4 times, even the greatest restaurants are you're going to find something that wasn't great. And I always felt like I should write about that thing. Right. And I would get in a lot of conversations with people kind of about that, why do you have to pick us on us about this? And
that's also the stuff that's interesting to the readers.
Yeah. And my answer is like, I don't work for you guys.
Right.
Like I work for the readers, and I want them to trust that I'm going to tell them honestly and unvarnished truth about the experiences I have in the restaurants. And like, I don't, some of my favorite restaurants in the world are 3-bean restaurants, right? And, and a lot of those restaurateurs think they should be 4-bean restaurant, right? It's like, just because I have some things that I find reason to be critical about doesn't mean I still love it there, right? Like, but this is a piece of criticism where I'm trying to share experiences about eating out, and they're not always 100% fawning, right? But I think I grew up my dad was a politician when I was a kid, and I know what it's like to have, at least I know what it's like to be in a household where someone is appears in the newspaper in a critical way. And I always think about that. I've always thought about that. I've always think about that whenever I write. Always, always, always.
So if you're going to have a criticism in there, you're absolutely making sure that it had fact-based, it had substance, so you had a reason that you were justifying that one bean, for example.
Yeah. And I don't take pleasure in it. I don't take pleasure in not.
I think it would be really hard. I don't know if I could do that. I know I couldn't do that.
I mean, it's just, that's part of being a critic.
Yeah.
And I, I started it at an early age. So I sort of, internalized a lot of what was difficult about the job at an early age in ways that made me stop kind of thinking about it as much. It just became a part of my life, is that, there's people that are going to really dislike me, and that's part of what it's like to work at a newspaper, frankly. I mean, for most people's
you have
jobs,
to get thick skin.
Yeah, you have to have thick skin. You got to be able to take punch, and like,
because even
you're not going to make friends. It's not, I mean, you're going to make maybe some friends, but you shouldn't be in it thinking you're going to make friends, because you're not.
Like, restaurants are such a hot button thing. People feel so passionately, especially here in New Orleans and I'm DC, these places, New York. The restaurants are their core, and it's as if you're attacking people personally if you say that one of their favorite restaurants isn't great. Nutrition tends to not be quite so volatile, but even as a nutrition columnist, I had to get thicker skin over the past 13 years. I could not do your job, because I would get someone that would, email me and say, I had one guy or person that said they were going to line their bird cage with one of my articles. They thought it was so, they disagreed with the point in there so much. And then another person, the same article, it was one that I knew would be a little divisive, said that they were going to use it for their next crawfish boil and line their table. Those to me were funny, and
fish wrap. It's like, that's one of the.
But to your, like what you said too, okay, you have to get thicker skin. And as long as I know that what I wrote is accurate, and they don't like that, but it's accurate, and that's what the facts are. They just don't like those facts. That's okay. But when it was something that might be gray and you would question it, it's like, so you have to be really sure before you're going to put a criticism in there.
Yeah. And, an opinion is always debatable, right? Yeah. What I always just sort of leaned on is like, I just want to be true to my experiences. And, what else can I do? Right. And so that's the way I navigated that. And I also get that people, react to news stories for lots of different reasons.
I just had this moment pop in my head I have to share. So with Eat Fit here, our nonprofit restaurant initiative, we have Eat Fit NOLA, Eat Fit through different cities throughout the state. And I'm not going to say which restaurant it is. I'll tell you separately because I don't want to say it out loud. I really like the guy. I had walked into a restaurant that I happened to be passing by in the CBD, and my husband loves this place, and he goes there. It's kind of a very casual deli, convenience store type place. And so I happened to be passing by, and I'm like, that's that place that Brad keeps talking about. He always just comes home and says it brings him happiness, every day that he goes there for lunch. So I stop in, introduce myself, and tell him about Eat Fit NOLA and would he want to be a partner. It's a nonprofit and all this stuff. And he's looking at me like he doesn't really understand. And he's kind of suspicious. What am I trying to say? So then I say I'm a registered dietitian. I'm a nutrition columnist for the Times-Picayune. He starts railing into me for one of the pieces that you had done.
My apologies.
And there's customers. And he's he's waving his arms. He's like screaming. My cheeks are bright red because it's obviously like he's screaming at me. It was about you. And
sorry,
he had disagreed.
So, you get in conversations
you
like
get
that. It's just part of it. And I think that people I had started saying, I do think that people react to things they read in the news and sort of project their frustrations against journalists and particular news stories for reasons that go outside the bounds of whatever that news story contains, right? I mean, and that's always been the case. I think it's actually more so now today than when I started, but and you have to understand that. And there was people take offense. You pointed this out earlier. When they might love a restaurant, it's kind of part of their identity. They talk about loving this restaurant and it's their favorite place to go, and they consider themselves a person of refined taste. And then they pick up the paper and they write something about that restaurant they completely disagree with and suggest it's not as good as they think it is. That's really offensive to some people. And that's just part of the deal. But it's remarkable how volatile people can be about
extremely. So shifting gears to your current role with the New York Times, first of all, it's probably a lot better for your health because we don't have 6-7 times out eating the full menu at every restaurant.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I'm home for dinner more, although I do travel. And there's times, I was just in Washington, D.C. for a story that'll be out later in the fall where, I was there for 4.5 days and was eating, 4 restaurant meals a day because that's what the story required, that I cover as much ground as I could to gather information for this story. And that information happened to require me eating in restaurants, right? So that happens.
Whenever you do that, and also kind of in the food critic days and like this project in DC, and you are eating in restaurants and you are ordering as much of the full menu as possible, do you do like a bite, a taste, and then minimize how much of each thing since there are so many?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, when I was, eating in New Orleans as the restaurant critic, I would never do double dinners and double lunches. I didn't do that. It just doesn't sound fun to me. But when you're traveling and you're trying to capture, when you're writing a restaurant story and
you have limited time.
Yeah, you have limited time. And you what you want to find out is you want to know more about what a eating culture is like. You want to duck into as many restaurants as you can, but I'm not going to all those places and ordering the whole menu.
Right.
I mean, I'm trying to get a taste of what they do to their signature dishes. There'll be usually I'll do kind of a full lunch and a full dinner and then like a pre-lunch where I get a taste of something, and I try to go with another person at least, so who might not be on that same treadmill, who's eating a full meal, and then I'll order some small things on top of it, and so I can get a taste of it. So the answer to your question is yes, I am kind of getting a taste, but I also do, when I travel, I do have do one meal where I'm going to order like a normal dinner, and
then enlist people to help.
Yeah, and I go to friends, and sometimes I go to places I don't know many people, and you gotta, call friends of friends and things like that.
So with your role now, you're doing a lot of profile stories, trend stories, investigative. How is that different? Like what does that look like, and how's it different, and what types of things are you covering?
Well, those general categories of journalistic styles, trend stories, profiles and stuff, investigations, I did that at the Picayune. The difference is that I'm pulling them out of places I don't live. I'm traveling to get stories.
That I would think would be a lot harder.
It's different.
So can you give us just kind of we could dive deep into this one, but just for our listeners, one of the highest profile investigative stories that you did here recently in New Orleans. It was pretty explosive.
I assume you're talking about an investigation to claims of sexual harassment in the culture at the Best Restaurant Group.
So the Me Too movement had not really started. It was within the first Tell me that. There was an interesting timing of some of this.
Well, what we now consider to be the Me Too movement was, most people would say that it sort of started with the publication by the New York Times and the New Yorker had, sort of competing investigations into the Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein. And that was in the fall of 2017. As it happened that same year, I had worked for months on this investigation into the restaurant company owned by the celebrity chef John Besh, and our story ended up coming out. I forget the exact number of days, but it was something like 10 days later.
Yeah,
and so.
But it was something you'd been working on for months, and I knew that you had been working on that for months. And then when this other, all of this was like rising to the surface, and then that was just a huge bombshell here in New Orleans. And I bring that up, it's not a nutrition thing. It shows that was a lot of digging. It was a lot of investigation, and to me, that's a very, I don't know. I think to say that it's like I would feel proud of you for doing that, but for bringing that to light and for digging and going against what's a real popular grain and saying this is what's going on and this quite frankly isn't right, is what the synopsis is. I think that that's a really admirable thing, and it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of focus to do it.
It did take time and focus. Thank you for noticing. It was definitely the most uncomfortable thing I've done. Again, didn't take any pleasure in it. It did, I think, have it appeared at a unique time in the culture because of these other stories that were coming out in the media about people, and it did change the way that I thought about what it might be like to work at a restaurant. I mean, it figured like that. I think that there's, literally millions of people who work in restaurants and really have a good experience and like it. But I don't think that the press has spent enough time covering restaurant work as a labor issue. And that's kind of what I felt that was. And I didn't think that until I, got through that particular investigation, and have written a handful of other stories about lesser known people, but on similar topics. When I started as a restaurant writer in 1996, there was no food channel. There was just the idea, the concept of a celebrity chef, of a celebrity restaurant chef was still sort of embryonic, it wasn't, I was like in the sort of food writing community when I would go to conferences and stuff, I was like, it was unique to be a straight male, there wasn't a lot of, it was unique to be young. Eater didn't exist. We didn't think much about the internet, like so much has changed in the way that the whole sort of entertainment media complex that has developed around restaurants did not exist when I first got into this. And, today it's a very, young people aspire to do, to be in food media. There are, it's very common for there to be reporters of some type, be they bloggers, independent bloggers, or people working for monthly magazines or online publications or the traditional newspaper, like the Times-Picayune. There's in cities today, it's common for there to be multiple people covering the scene. And I don't feel like that flowering of eyeballs on the industry had resulted in there being an appropriate, that didn't result in people thinking hard and close about the folks in the restaurant industry who didn't happen to be the famous people.
Right.
Let's put it that way. And I think it's an important topic,
And you're going to be covering more on labor issues.
Yeah, I mean, that's like something I care about. It's something the Times cares about, and looking at these issues that affect restaurant workers that haven't been investigated that much, haven't been talked about too much.
I think too, something that I would love, and if you ever do, let me know, because I would love to like chime in on some. But the mental health and wellness of restaurant workers, I think, is something that hasn't gotten the attention it deserves. The addiction and, alcohol and drug, and the cycle of that almost maybe not encourages it, but um, doesn't stop it, and sometimes with the double shifts and the really late nights, and then, all of this gets, it's things that kind of unravel someone's personal life and their personal wellness. So I think looking at addiction would be one, and then the other is healthcare that's available, because that's something that for our Eat Fit restaurants, we can do health screenings at a steep discount, because a lot of these workers, they may not have access to that. And what I've also seen with our role with the restaurants with Eat Fit, they're asking us so many health questions because they don't have someone else that they're going to for that. And so they really, that's been a side benefit that I hadn't even expected, is that, wow, like they can turn to us and they trust us and they know that they have a solid resource because they don't have access to regular medical care in a very easy way, or with their schedule that works and stuff like that. So I think that'd be a cool thing to.
Yeah. I mean, I think all of those issues are incredibly important. And I do feel that mental wellness and sort of addiction issues are in the restaurant industry are issues that I think there are more people talking about those things than there were 5 years ago, which is great. And, how to give healthcare and benefits and stuff to people in the restaurant industry, again, is something that I feel like more people are talking about and writing about than that used to be. But I still think that those things are problems. And I personally find evidence that suggests companies of any type that treat their employees well benefit economically.
Oh gosh, yes.
And
for so many reasons.
Yeah. And so, I'm a journalist and I'm always open to information and what, that might suggest what conclusions I've made are incorrect. But I from what I can tell and from what I've been able to determine in sort of my reading and reporting is that that people in the, leaders, the restaurateurs, the business owners, the capitalists in the restaurant industry should care more about the well-being of their employees, not just because it's the right thing to do and not just because it's something people are talking about and that is in some ways trendy. I think they should care about that stuff because I think their businesses will improve. Period.
Period.
I really like.
Amen.
I think doing the right thing is something I think people should do, right. But it's not just about that,
right.
And you have healthier communities when people are healthier, because of their work. And I do believe that there was, for much of the time that I've covered restaurants, an expectation that, working in a kitchen was hard work. You're going to get cuts and you were going to drink a lot and you were going to kind of punish your body and that was sort of part of it. And that if you were a woman, you were going to be expected to be harassed and hit on by customers and employees and stuff, because that's how things are. And that's not how things should be. That's not right. And the people who work in restaurants have all the same legal protections, technically speaking, where it comes to harassment, that people who work in law firms and banks, right? And that is something that I don't feel that not just people in the restaurant community, but the general public fully accept,
Right.
I feel as if, there's many customers who think well, gosh, if you're getting harassed at work, go get a real job. That's like a dismissive way to put it, but I feel like that is an attitude people hold. And I don't think that's
or
right
go
either.
to a different restaurant. And it's not always that easy.
And that is, in so many of the conversations I've had with people in the aftermath of that John Besh publication, the publication of that story, I thought it was important to try to meet with, or at least speak with, or communicate with over the phone in some way, every person who came out from the restaurant community and reached out to me or the PICUN in general to say, I have a story that I think you should hear about how I've been treated. And that the number of those interviews is I stopped counting when it hit 100.
Wow.
It's a lot, right?
Wow.
And so many people struggled with that, expressed frustration with this idea that that their jobs were disposable.
Right.
You know, like, well, if it sucks there, just go work at a different bar or at a different restaurant. And that's not, no, I want to work at this one. You know, this is the one that's close to my house. And that and I like everything about it, except I can't go into the freezer when there's a, this certain guy at work, and that shouldn't be right. I don't want to leave because then he wins, and, most of those interviews didn't turn into stories, but they did provide me, I feel like, with a valuable insight into what, a little taste of what, of the dark side of what it's like to work in the restaurant industry, particularly if you're a woman.
And I think just what you said that, those interviews exceeded 100. So when we say investigative journalism, you are digging, 100 interviews plus.
And that was all just, to me, I just chalked that up as that's what beat reporting had become. But again,
on one topic, on one giant story, that's a lot.
And that's in the aftermath of the Rush story, right? So that's not all people who work for him, or work for that company. But
let's be clear.
Yeah, let's be really clear about that. That it was, and I think another reason that story got a lot of attention is because I think people recognized it was an industry-wide problem.
Yeah, And wellness in general, I think, so I'm excited to see the labor stories you do. And if there are other things that are addressing, how do we kind of give this, make it not the norm to tax our bodies, drink after your shift, or these things that you were just saying are kind of the norm. Okay, I work in this industry. This is kind of what goes along with it. It doesn't have to be. And so kind of helping to change that story, I think, is awesome. With restaurants and trends on healthy food, tell me your thoughts on that.
Well, when for dynamics that we've sort of discussed on, touched on earlier in this interview, like when I go to restaurants, I don't.
You're not seeking it out.
It's not like paramount, right? That I want to see what the healthy options are here. And I would say too, particularly after I first moved here, in the early 2000s, I think it was true that like lots of New Orleans restaurants, or that there was I don't want to call it a trend, an impulse in Southeast Louisiana for restaurants to sort of outdo each other with the sort of richness of something, that I'm not just going to wrap it in bacon, I'm going to, And I think that in New Orleans that has faded, a touch. But you can still get super unhealthy food if you so aspire to. But like that, I don't feel like that is, there's what I felt like a sort of a market pressure almost to make over the top rich food. I think that's toned down. I feel that the market, people kind of expect and want local products in a way that benefits health, because that often translates to vegetables, to produce,
fish,
right?
Seafood.
Yeah, like people have kind of more of an appreciation for not just asparagus, but for seasonal stuff. And it makes chefs and restaurateurs put more, market fresh dishes that showcase things that happen to be healthy,
right?
On
I
their
also
menus.
think dining out and restaurants have become so much more a part of our life than they were 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I think 20 years ago, it was a very special occasion for a lot of families, a lot of people. You might go out to a restaurant once a month, twice a month, and it was like, so you wanted to indulge in splurge, but now it's such a common part of life for people. One, for social, some because they are busy and it's easier to stop at a restaurant instead of cooking. And so people, I think, are also interested in things that aren't quite so heavy because this is their day in, day out.
Mm-hmm.
And the restaurants, at least of course, I'm asking them, hey, what kind of requests are you getting for it? I have one restaurant describes it as like that fourth diner that he's trying to appeal to. You got 4 people at the table. 3 of them really don't care what they eat. They're just in it for what's going to taste the best. But that 4th person is mindful, and they're mindful about whatever it might be nutritionally, whether they want gluten-free or they want lower carb or whatever it is. And that 4th person is often the one who's deciding where they go so that those needs can be met. Mm-hmm. So having at least just something available on the menu or something that can accommodate kind of broadens their reach to the consumers.
Yeah, that all makes a lot of sense to me, and it makes me think of it. There's two other points that I think I would bring up about aspects of menus that have changed and have to do with wellness. The first gets to your idea, this fourth diner. It's very common now for restaurants to have vegetarian dishes, particularly entrees, right? Like that clearly seem to me to be a response to
request
a growing number of vegetarians and vegans, and also omnivores like myself who like
vegetables.
Yeah, I mean,
proudly.
I like to know what a really great chef is going to create for a vegetarian. I mean, often that'll be something I want to order. I also plate sizes have changed. It's very common now for restaurants to have what they might call small plates. And even some places have kind of like medium-sized plates.
Sometimes it's confusing.
It can be confusing, but it does, I think, and that's often meant to get tables to order lots of different things to, pass around. But it also allows diners to eat less,
mm-hmm.
Exactly. Like you don't have this clean plate fixation.
You don't have to commit to this giant entree.
Yeah. And that, and those, the smaller dishes often aren't rounded out with the potatoes and the other things that are sort of calorie. And, it's smaller pieces of meat.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, particularly when I go out, not as a critic, I eat less and I'm grateful for it, at restaurants that have these smaller plate options. I often skip entrees, if it's just my wife and I or whatever.
Well, sometimes those small plates, you can't decide between 3 or 4 of them. So then, let's split these. And then, as you said, that becomes your entree as well.
Yeah. But the net total is less calories consumed.
Than a giant platter.
Yeah. And so those are,
mm-hmm.
I think trends in the direction of,
that allow people to be healthier. More local, more vegetable forward, and more creativity with these things, more vegetarian requests. And plate sizes, the small plate trend. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think all of that is great. And I think with, in the US, like we're so accustomed to, we get what we want when we want it. And we're very impatient and we want it like this. And we want it, and I don't love that about just the culture that it is, we all want something right now and exactly how we require it or request it. But restaurants are accommodating some of these needs because people are asking for it. And so I do think that that's good. I think that that's one good result is these things are starting to appear on the menus. Anything else that you would say is, just either a trend that you see that you think is interesting, particularly to do with any type of wellness or not, just something that you think is really interesting with the restaurant industry that people go, really?
I mean, to touch back on a topic we spoke about earlier, I do feel as if restaurant employees are more, have been given license to talk about their well-being that I think is healthy. I think it's a generational element there to it, like millennials, rising into the workforce who feel like for a variety of reasons more empowered to speak about their sort of feelings. And I think that's had an impact on, I think it will have an impact, right? Like where, if you run a restaurant, you want really good employees, you're going to have to,
listen to them
and treat them well. And because otherwise they're going to work somewhere else that's going to treat them better. Right. I mean, and so there's that. On a more local level that has to do with wellness, the one thing that I sort of didn't bring up, and to me, far and away, the single reason, well, I don't want to get that, a big reason that New Orleans is a fantastic place to eat has to do with seafood. I mean, that it is far and away the best local asset that this cuisine has is its seafood. And, and seafood is healthier than other proteins, right? Am I right about that? Like,
yes.
And that is,
and it's hard to mess it up.
Yeah, it's hard to mess it up. It's like,
seafood.
You can, and I know that there's a lot of, there's a lot of butter and fat and stuff that goes into a lot of preparations of seafood. But that to me is the one part about New Orleans restaurants that I appreciate the most. It's frankly just, I think that the local seafood is delicious. And there's a lot of variety. And I feel better when I eat seafood than when I eat steak, and I love steak. So it is, it is possible, I think, to really fully appreciate New Orleans cuisine and New Orleans restaurants without turning it into sort of a competition into how gluttonous you can be, right? It's not. It doesn't have to be like that, right? I mean, there's all sorts of options that give you all the rewards of what New Orleans cuisine can offer without, taking it out of you in terms of your health.
Spoken from the restaurant expert himself. Listen to him. If you're not going to listen to the nutritionist, listen to the restaurant expert. All right. Well, thank you so much, Brett, for spending the time. And then we'll put whatever the links that you have that would be a way that people can reach you, or if there's websites, links, so people can see more of your work and see the things that we've been talking about. So thanks so much.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm so grateful to Brett for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed our conversation as I did. You can find the links that he mentioned in the show notes of this episode. I'm Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. And if you would like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life possible.